I'm a small town kid born with a big city spirit. I choose to play a lot of awesome roles in life: mom, wife, entrepreneur, CEO, board member, investor, and mentor. 17 years ago, I founded a marketing consultancy, and ever since, my husband JR and I have been building our careers and our family on the exact same timeline. Yep, that means 4 kids, 3 businesses, 2 careers, all building towards one life we love. When I discovered I could purposefully embrace all of these ands in my life, it unlocked my world. And I want that for you too. I'm Tiffany Souter, and this is Scared Confident. We're about ready to jump into a conversation between myself and Nathaniel McGuire. So if you're new to the show, you may not have heard his name, but Nathaniel really was on day one of this journey with me. He's a marriage and family psychologist in Indianapolis, and he is the one who kind of pioneered this idea of the fear interview and facilitated me through my fear interview as I started my fear journey. So that's who Nathaniel is. I reached back out to him because I started to notice this connection between fear and vulnerability. And I began to say, I think maybe vulnerability is an antidote to fear. And I wanted to get his perspective because he's been watching and studying and interacting with people under this umbrella of fear for much longer than I have. And so I wanted to get his perspective. So listen in to what Nathaniel had to say. I re-listened to my fear interview a month ago, and it is really powerful, Nathaniel, to go back and hear it again.
What stuck out to you when you went back and listened? What were the different pieces?
I should pull my notes out. Actually, let me grab my notebook because I think I wrote them down. Oh, yes. You said to me, so basically you're allowing fear to be in the driver's seat in the way that in your beliefs about yourself, what you say yes to, what you say no to, and who you say yes to and who you say no to. This idea that fear was controlling not just my self-perception, but actually changing who I was to myself. And as I listened back to it, I was able to see there was fear in my marriage, there was fear in my friendships, there was fear in my work. Even these things that I would have said were my most intimate relationships, fear was still one of the most dominant aspects of that relationship. And one of my ahas when I listened back to it, I was in my friendships then, they knew very little about the hard things going on in my life. And that is such a tell that fear didn't want me to trust them with the honesty of who I was as a person, not because they hadn't earned that. Fear didn't want me to do that.
Well, it's powerful because of, a part of the topic, even with vulnerability. Brene Brown is really good at research that she's done around vulnerability. And I've seen it in my own practice that one of the biggest issues has to do with shame, right? This feeling that I am going to be rejected or disconnected. I'm going to be exposed in a way that if I open up to you, I'm going to be filled with shame. And the ultimate fear really behind all that is I'm going to be disconnected from people. And I'm filled at that moment with not feeling worthy, right? So this feeling of worth and value is the thing that keeps us from opening up, because we have this belief that, and many of us have had experiences before, where typically that comes from childhood, where something has happened. We opened up. We've been exposed. We've been caught. We've been shamed. And so we are trying to make sure we never experience that again, if we can help it. So to me, you've gone on this journey of opening up. And that was your concern is once you open up, are you going to be shamed? Are you still going to be worthy and respected? Are you going to be rejected? And that was kind of overwhelming you.
Totally. And what's so interesting is that fear is trying to get you to understand or trying to get you to believe if you share the most intimate things about your heart and what you think and your dreams, you are going to be isolated And in that, you experience isolation. And it's crazy.
One of the most profound things, I'll be honest, even as a man doing the work of sitting with people and counseling, even though we are taught how to create a safe space and how to connect, I really had to understand how much, as a male, opening up, sharing problems, a part of me wants to fix things and give answers and facts and what I'm thinking. It was really sitting with women for hours that caused me to understand the difference between like opening up and being vulnerable and sharing versus problem solving. And women taught me this simple definition of connection, which is I tell you how I feel, you tell me how you feel, and we have connection. And so often in communication, that is not happening the right way. So the actual disconnection is not just sharing how you feel, what is really going on. And you can talk about facts and solve problems all day and still not have this vulnerability of connection that I truly feel this way, and open up about it. But yeah, fear tries to actually tell you you're going to be disconnected, but you just need to do the thing that actually connects you. And then it tells you that if you do that, you're going to be disconnected, but you're already disconnected by not sharing anything. When you sit back and you listen at it, you just can hear how deceptive fear is, right? Like the lies and how easy it is to believe that I'm going to keep you safe if you do this. But essentially, that's what's causing the thing to happen, is the advice that it's giving.
Totally. So I thought it would make sense just to bring you back on, Nathaniel, and talk about this connection between vulnerability. Is vulnerability something that we can practice, that we can teach? When people ask me, like, how do you be vulnerable? I'm like, well, it's sort of like, how do you get fit? You just start using the machines. You just start doing it. It's very awkward at the beginning, but you have to at some point just start, even though you feel very ill-equipped to actually do the thing, and it's awkward and it feels weird and all this kind of stuff. But you're actually more qualified. I'm an experience-oriented researcher. You have a lot more data points than just one in my life. But what do you see? And what advice would you give people who are saying, how do I become vulnerable when I've practiced being guarded for so long?
So some of the people that I think we watch practice this thing called vulnerability as an art are comedians, right? Great comedians have the ability to make fun of themselves in a way that they allow you to be comfortable, to laugh at them and to laugh at yourself. The greatest have the ability to say, hey, I have these issues. And the ones that do it the best, it just makes you so comfortable, and it's extremely attractive for someone to be able to talk about themselves and name like what are the attributes they have and what are their weaknesses, and just laugh about it. If you ever watch, um, comedians, and you just sit back and you think about, why is that so funny? Why are some of the funniest comedians the ones that just have the ability to talk about like their relationships and what they do that doesn't make any sense, but they do it anyway, right? So one of the ways that I say to practice vulnerability, I remember I was working with a group of entrepreneurs, and there were male and female, and they were just talking about like when they're leading a group and they're often feeling that imposter syndrome. And so I was talking to some of them, and I said, I'm simply going to ask you if this is you. And I just want to see how you're going to respond, because we're practicing vulnerability. And I said, so you seem to just talk a lot. Is that you? You just talk a lot? And the first thing I was looking for is for them to do one simple thing. And guess what that was? I was just waiting for them to say, yeah. It was that simple. I was taking them through this over and over and over again. And Tiffany, I was just trying to show them that's what it meant to be vulnerable, right? So I had another guy come in and I said, and he'd already kind of said this to me, and others had said this about him. And I said, you seem pretty judgmental. Like, you're a judgmental person, aren't you? And he's just looking at me, right? I said, man, you want to practice being vulnerable, right? He said, yeah. I said, well, you seem pretty judgmental. Well, I don't know what you mean by that. Like, what does judgmental mean? Bro, you seem. So I'm going down the line of different people, just calling out things that I know we all struggle with, but they're up front in front of this group, and we're practicing vulnerability. So finally, I get to a young lady, and I said, you know what? Sometimes you just come off kind of dingy. Are you kind of dingy? You know what she said? Yup. Everybody laughed. Everybody let their hair down, because in that moment, she was simply vulnerable. It was beautiful and powerful at the same time. She said, yeah, I'm kind of dingy, and it sucks because I have blonde hair and people just assume that about me, but I kind of am. But I'm also brilliant. I'm also courageous. I've built several companies, right? So she, in that moment, realized that vulnerability was powerful. So people that are really able to accept it, you find, are people that understand that their vulnerability also makes them beautiful, right? In my opinion, from working with people, those experiences typically come from people who have been taught that. And what you often find is it's has to do with like how they're raised. So practicing it, though, literally just means that you have the ability to just say, that's me. That's who I am. I am like that. I do that. And the Beatitudes, actually, there's another reference for this. I like the way the New Testament talks about this. There's a spiritual connotation to this. It talks about those who are pure in heart can see God. And when you study it, what that really means is those who can come before God, and what I like to say, Ebonics form, keep it 100. Those who can come before God and just say, yeah, that's me. I do that. It means you can see God. You can see, you're honest with yourself. You're pure in heart in that moment. And you're just saying, this is me. And Tiffany, what I've learned, when you can really see you, it's not hard to see others. If you can see yourself, then you can see other people. When you're vulnerable with yourself, it's easy to see when other people are not being vulnerable, because you're just comfortable with who you are. You can just simply say, this is me. So I say all this to say that a practice is just to be able to say, this is me. So when you ignore the bad things that you think are critical, well, you also then can't see the good. You can't see your whole self. So when you are able to just say, this is me, whatever you consider a negative thing, then you can also see the good. And so that's the power of vulnerability. You can see all of you.
So there's two things that came to mind for me as you were talking. The first one is, I have thought I'm so visual and like experiential in the way that my body remembers things. When you talk about owning what's good about you, as honestly as you own your mistakes and what's, quote, bad about you, or the things that are still growing and developing in you, I've thought about being announced on stage. Like, somebody always says, here's your bio and here's about you. I'm like, could I walk as confidently on stage if someone is speaking all my accolades and the things that I'm proud of that have happened? Can I walk as certainly and as confidently on stage if someone is reading and exposing all of the things that I've done, or, you know what I mean, like said, or the hurts? Can I walk up as clearly? Because those are both who I am. You know what I mean? And fear wants me to hide actually both pieces of it, like what you said, that when somebody claps and applauds, for me to hide behind a wall and say, oh, it's no big deal, like, oh, like make myself small in that. And fear wants me to make myself even smaller, to think of weaknesses or the times when you were not what you wanted to be when those things are being exposed. And practicing this sense of centeredness, the sense of clarity of owning what God has put inside of me and saying either one of those stories that are told about me are imbalanced. But as a whole person, I present myself to the world. You know what I mean? I think about this sort of narrative of the stage as a way to like get myself equally comfortable with both sides of those. The other thing that you said is we can't really see other people until we've fully accepted who we are. And I've done a lot of work in the last year thinking about what's at stake. Like, why do all of this stupidly hard work? Why bust down fear? Why talk about vulnerability? Why do this? What's at stake if we don't? And and I can say the truest thing that has come into my life through this process of my fear journey and living it intentionally since we actually did that work is this closeness and this intimacy and this realization that relationships are what change the world. That's the thing. And when fear is like this static between you and the rest of humanity, your life doesn't have a chance to have the impact it was meant to have when fear is creating this perpetual static between you and the things that you care about, you and the people you care about, you and the organizations you care about, you and the things and the people you want to lead. You can't be fully present because you're constantly managing this thing that's between you and all the things that you love and care about. And I tell people, I'm like, there's a lot of things about my life that actually don't look that different. It's not like I joke, I like didn't become a zookeeper. I didn't suddenly like, but the way it feels has a presence to it that I didn't even know was possible. And I know as a result of that, my impact has to be exponential because I feel it. I'm present. I can listen. I can see. I can hear. And so it's so interesting that you said that is like you can't consume authentically what the world is trying to bring to your doorstep as a human being until you've fully worked through this narrative of fear and what it's trying to do inside your own mind and self-perception.
As I started to study fear and do these interviews, Tiffany, the first thing that I discovered was emotionally what it robs, right? So I love what you said. Like there's this other part where, there's purposes, there's goals, and there's dreams that it can keep you from. But I was also working with very successful people that had notched off a bucket list of everything, but they're still full of fear. So they may achieve this and that, but on the inside, they don't feel worthy. They don't feel good enough. They are filled with anxiety. They're not experiencing joy, happiness. So fear, it's powerful because it comes to rob you of faith. And when it can rob you of faith, then it can cause you to be hopeless. And if you're walking around hopeless, there's no greater pain than that, because it goes from, I don't really hope for this or that. And then when you're totally hopeless, it tells you then what's the point of living, right? And so very successful people can commit suicide because in their mind, they are going through the struggle of fear and it is robbing their ability to love, to connect, to open up, to do all these things. And so you cannot evolve and become who you really are without fear. Fear will tell you who you are. Fear will give you an identity and you will think that that's your identity. So that is how powerful it is. And that's why it is necessary, Tiffany, to do this work because it destroys everything.
You used the words imposter syndrome a few minutes ago when you talked about, I think you were speaking to a group of entrepreneurs or business owners. And I'd love to hear your definition of that because it's like this term that is suddenly kind of having its day. And so I'd love to hear from you kind of what your definition of imposter syndrome is and what you think is either in conflict or where that starts. What sort of is the soil that imposter syndrome feeds on? I've got my own like again, Tiffany's social school of observation. I need to name it because it's not an academic place I go. um, but I'd love to hear what soil you think it takes root in, and what your definition or like observation of what imposter syndrome is.
I see imposter syndrome as refusing to say you are who God says you are. I see imposter syndrome as someone that has the ability to do something, but on the inside, they feel that everyone's going to figure out that they are the greatest con man ever. And their entire mind, when they are carrying out any task, is solely fixated on when are these people going to find me out that I cannot do what they believe I can do. When you dig into many of these narratives where people are totally overwhelmed with imposter syndrome, it does come down to this idea of, in their mind, who they think they should be. And it's always this vision of this perfection, that once they get to this point, then they're no longer an imposter. So it's refusing to say that you can be everything that God says you are. And when you refuse that, to me, that's like a form of imposter syndrome.
I would agree with you, Nathaniel. I think the other thing, maybe it's just part B of your answer, is if I can accept that failing is a possible outcome, and that I'm willing to like recognize and be okay with that in whatever role I'm getting ready to go perform, then I feel like that chases away imposter syndrome too. Cause it's like my performance in this thing that I'm about ready to go do, or this job, or this board role, or whatever the thing is, if I'm not good, I'm going to know maybe first. Does that make sense? Like, I don't have to feel like an imposter because I might be good and I might be bad. And if I'm bad, then we should all talk about that. And I have found that that chases it away from me when I'm like, well, I might just be bad at it. And if I'm bad at it, that doesn't make me a bad person. That just means I was bad at this. And I don't know. I think imposter syndrome is a little bit like what you said, not accepting who God has made you to be. And I think sometimes people's identities start to be in conflict with roles that they have taken on. And that friction that happens when there is just conflict between those two things, I think that's sometimes when imposter syndrome starts to come up too. So anyway, I think it's this abstract concept that people throw around, assuming we all know what it means. But I think it's worth sitting on just for a minute.
Well, corporately too, what's so hard? It has to do with, you're in a work environment, and part of the goal is to rise at any cost, right? Part of it is to make more money and to climb a kind of corporate ladder. So, you never want to say, I'm not going to make more money or climb because this position that is opening up, that everybody is getting trained for, or they may have some education. I can't say, I don't feel like I'm the best on the interview for this, right? The last thing you should say is that I can't do, or I'm afraid I can't do a good job. So there's a certain type of vulnerability when you're trying to get a job that, anytime in those situations, like, you can't say that. So most people in any job, deep down, they don't know how good they're going to be at this, but they have to sell themselves. So that's always a part of the mind state. To me, it's the same form of like false humility, right? It's like you just refuse to really say who you are in that moment. But when you're trying to go for something, you got to sell it. And so to me, that's why it's so heavily involved with people trying to get jobs. Like, we really should all kind of have a sense of somewhat of an imposter syndrome, because what you have to sell about yourself in that moment, you're like, can I really fulfill all this? I do know I need this paycheck, and I do know this seems like a cool title, but can I really do everything that I'm saying that I'm going to do? Do they really expect me to do what I just said? that I just sold to them. And I can't believe I really said I can do all that, and I've never really done that in certain positions. So, a part of that I think is just the human process that if you're a decent person, you're probably wondering, can I really fulfill everything I just said I'm going to fulfill when I apply for this job? So I think it just comes hand in hand with the work environment.
That's a really good point. We met kind of in the just right after the center of COVID. And you've been a therapist for a long time and you were just buried under the weight of helping the general public process everything that happened. We're a year-ish out from, I think, what we would consider prime pandemic. What are you seeing? Just any general observations or things that we should all just have awareness of in our own lives or families, communities? What are you kind of seeing fear's narrative is right now, or what's kind of playing out generally as you're talking to people?
Well, in my line of work, there's honestly been a lot of great things. The stigma of mental health has truly been highlighted. Christians woke up, religious people woke up and said, hey, I may have faith, but I might need some medication too. So that's been really good. One of the things I think America doesn't realize that there are some things that are really never going to be the same, because a part of therapy, what you're hoping of, to have happen is someone to sit and be still and reflect. The pandemic caused people to do that. And a lot of people woke up and said, I'm not going to ever work like that again. What was I doing? Why was I working that hard and working that many hours and not spending time with my family and friends? And so it's really hard for employers right now to find employees in some of these occupations and some of these sectors, because some people are not going to work like that anymore. And I think that the country's kind of catching up and trying to reconcile. So a lot of these things are really good, because what it did, it just caused us to stop where we were on this treadmill. And there really hasn't been a return to that. What's been hard is because there's so much death too, and so much loss, kind of to talk about this other side that has also been healthy. It's as if we all got put in timeout, right? Like we were all reprimanded for a little bit. And that's kind of the experience. And a lot of people really learned from being in that timeout. So overwhelmingly, that's what I've seen as a result of the pandemic. That was really good.
Yeah, some of us did better in timeout than others.
Some of us still found things to do.
Oh, yeah, that's right. No, I credit this whole project with, I wasn't bored during the pandemic, but I needed a creative outlet. And I'm such an externalizer, and without people around, I think I just needed help making sense of what I was going through. And so I know there's a lot of positive things that came out of, like you said, that timeout. Well, Nathaniel, it was awesome to have you back on. If anybody listening would like to go through the fear journey, we'll put Nathaniel's contact information in show notes so that you can reach out to him. I've shared so many times. It's been so life-changing for me, and he's generously shared with us some of the questions he asks. So we'll also provide a link to the download that we created with him. But Nathaniel, thanks for coming back on and helping us continue to sort through fear and what it's trying to quiet in each of us.
Thank you so much, Tiffany. I just want to say it's been awesome watching you use your gift to help others, because that's the number one thing fear comes to still is your gift and your ability to bless others. So it's been awesome to go on this journey with you. So thank you, Tiffany.
Thanks. After this conversation with Nathaniel, I was reminded of a question that I got recently after I gave a presentation on living scared confident. And the question from the audience was, is fear something that you actually can tackle? Like that it's done, you're recovered, it has no role in your life at all? Or is it a constant journey, a constant battle of managing it? And I wish I would have remembered to ask Nathaniel that question. Next time we have him on, remind me, because I want to ask him the question. But my answer was that I think it's a journey. I think it's about having tools, and those tools being able to be like used and pulled out almost more subconsciously, where like right now I have like an awareness. I know my triggers. I know like the way my body reacts when fear is actually making decisions instead of me and my priorities and my goals. And then I'm able to like consciously stop and say, okay, fear is taking over. That's not how I'm going to live my life. Here is the tool that I'm going to use. Fear, go away. And then I'm back on track. And I think that as you practice that, it starts to become more subconscious. So my opinion, my perspective, my experience, maybe at this far in the journey, is that it's not that fear is no more, but I feel way more on top of it. Thank you for joining me on another episode of Scared Confident. Until next time, keep telling fear, you will not decide what happens in my life. I will. If you want to get the inside scoop, sign up for my newsletter. We decided to make content for you instead of social media algorithms. The link is waiting for you in show notes, or you can head over to tiffanysauter.com. Thanks for listening in.